Awesome. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about understanding healthy boundaries. My name is Pearl, and I'm a clinical intern at Allow Health, and I am joined by Dr. Marybeth Heather, who is the founder of Allow Health, and we'll kind of give some more introductions, I think, on the next slide, so we'll kind of go into that. But just to kind of introduce our topic for today, for our presentation. And thank you for joining. And thank you if you're watching this on a recording on our website. Thank you for doing that as well. We're glad to have you. Oh, come on, slides. There we go. Okay. So here are just some fun pictures of Dr. Heather. Hers pictures are more on the right side, and we kind of merged them all together into this wonderful collage just to kind of show you all a little bit about who we are in our lives. I have two lovely golden doodles, Shadow and Louie, who are my life, so I always include them on here. I also am an avid knitter, and I like to knit sweaters like basically anytime in my free time. So I included one of those on here. I'm also a soon-to-be Northwestern graduate with my master's in clinical mental health counseling, which will be happening this month or next month. And yeah, so just included some nice pictures here of a little bit about my life, and I can let Dr. Heather explain a little bit about her pictures as well and go from there.
Great. Thanks, Bro. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Marybeth Heather. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor and the CEO and clinical director of Allow Health. So we do have a few pictures here. We have one of Pearl and I from an advocacy day we attended on Federal Hill. Some other fun things and crafts I like to do and events that I've been to for Allow Health, as well as my cat and dog there in the bottom. That's Nell and Murphy with my husband, and another little picture of Murphy just snuggling with me because he is also a snuggly golden doodle as well. So welcome all, and we're gonna get into it and see what we can learn about boundaries today.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right. So a few learning objectives for today. We're going to define what healthy boundaries are and what they look like. We're going to identify signs of unclear or ineffective boundaries. We're also going to be able to explain common emotional barriers that make boundary setting difficult, also while demonstrating the use of clear and assertive boundaries. And we have a couple different case studies to kind of show some real world examples of what that might look like in different scenarios. And also we will apply a framework to develop realistic boundaries in personal scenarios. So to start, a little bit about what boundaries are. So boundaries are limits that we set in our lives to protect our time, our energy, our emotions, and our values. A lot of people were not taught how to set boundaries. And that depends on, what culture you might have grown up in, or just the kind of home, kind of parents you had growing up, who had discussions around boundaries and around, emotional safety and psychological safety. So it can be something that's increasingly difficult in adulthood if that's not something you learned how to really set for yourself growing up. And it's just important to note here that that's not a sign that you're broken or any way, or that, you're abnormal. This is actually something that happens to a lot of people. I think it's, pretty common that people start to learn how to set boundaries in adulthood and haven't really had experience or practice doing that before them. And to go with that, setting boundaries can feel really uncomfortable because of that, especially if you haven't really been taught how to do that. It can be scary, or it can even feel like you're being mean to someone or confronting them in a really kind of aggressive way, right? But really, it's not really about that with setting boundaries. And I think a really good reflection to have and to ask yourself to see if maybe there are some ways that you can improve your boundaries is to ask yourself the question, is there a situation that I might have said yes to, but I really wanted to say no? And I think that can come up in a lot of, you can think about that question in a lot of different areas of your life, like at work or with family or with romantic partners or friends. those are the different situations that you can kind of take that question with you and kind of look at it and say, are there situations where maybe I wasn't setting a boundary and I really feel like looking back now, I could have set that boundary.
And they're fluid, right, Pearl? Because we have to keep growing them and we learn new
Yeah.
things and they change by environment. So it's always growing for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like kind of going off of that, like we're always adaptable as people, and especially with how we set boundaries, it's always something we can improve at. Exactly. What boundaries can help with? They can help reduce stress and resentment towards others. It can improve relationships, again, like family relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, can protect your own emotional and physical well-being, and can also increase self-respect for yourself. A key point here, boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about communicating what you need. I think the idea of that, like, oh, if I'm setting a boundary, that means I'm, being controlling or I'm being selfish, that is really something that shies people away from setting a boundary because they don't want to feel like they're being selfish in that moment. But really, it's not about controlling others. It's really just about what you need in that moment and communicating that in a clear way. So, what are some common signs of weak or unclear boundaries? So a lot of signs that we often, can see in the therapy room that relate to when boundaries may be unclear or weak in a person's life is they're feeling really drained after interactions. Maybe they're like having difficulty setting boundaries with a friend. And, maybe a time boundary is something they want to set. Spending, a certain amount of time with that person and they're just not able to set that. And so when they're with that person, rather than feeling uplifted and excited to be with them, they're just feeling like heavy and drained. Um, Saying yes out of guilt or fear, again, like being afraid of, upsetting the person or, feeling selfish, resentment towards others, avoiding conflict at all costs, or feeling responsible for others' emotions. These are signs of learned patterns. Again, like this is not a personal failure on your part. If these are things that you're noticing in yourself, these are just patterns that you've kind of just learned to live with because you haven't really, set a boundary before. You haven't learned how to do that. And so this isn't a failure on your part, it's more of just a pattern. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when thinking about setting boundaries in your life with others.
As you were sharing earlier, Pearl, right? It may be culturally that the boundaries are encouraged to be one way, and
Yeah.
it by setting it's going to be different, right? You might have friends who have really open boundaries with their parents, for example, but you might have really closed boundaries with your parents, or vice versa, or different with one person in your family than another. And either one person in your friend group, right? Or think about your job. There's certainly different boundaries you have with your supervisor than you do with someone else that you work with.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think like too with like the cultural piece, like if you grew up in a certain culture and you're setting a boundary with someone who grew up in another culture, like there might be a lot of like unclear, communication there that needs to be more clarified, right? It just working a little bit more effortly, is that a word? I don't know if that's a word, but you know what I
just
mean.
make up words.
We'll make it a word.
Do what you want.
But like just working harder to like it might like you might need a little bit more effort. There we go. To like tie that together, right? Yeah.
You'll get more into that about the understanding piece when you communicate with others later.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I kind of mentioned before, there's a lot of different types of boundaries that you can set in your life. Emotional boundary. These are the topics or behaviors that you allow and like accept with others, in your life. Time boundaries can be really important, how you spend your time and structure your availability. I think this is one that can be really difficult sometimes, with like romantic partners, which we kind of talk about in a little case study later. Because I think, if someone is feeling like, oh, if you don't want to spend time with me, that means you don't love me, or that means, you don't care about me. It's like, no, like I just, communicating that I want to be fully present when I'm spending time with you, and that means I need time to recharge, right? So kind of explaining what that means to set that boundary of time. Um, a physical boundary, personal space and touch. That includes, intimacy and sexual boundaries as well. Digital boundaries, so around like texting, social media, work messages, especially like making sure you're setting that boundary of like, okay, when will I accept, work, like what hour of the day am I no longer going to accept like messages from work, right? Because that can often, affect work-life balance, of course. And then mental boundaries, so around opinions, beliefs, decision making, and setting boundaries there about what you feel are your values that you want to keep. And why boundaries feel hard. Yeah, we kind of pinpointed on this on the slide around, common signs of like unclear boundaries. But we often have a fear of disappointing others, and boundaries can cause that. Like setting a boundary can cause disappointment for someone, like the person that we're setting the boundary with, and that's okay. That doesn't mean the boundary's wrong. Um, I think we just, have a fear of that happening. And, avoidance can definitely happen instead if we're having that fear of disappointing someone. Similarly, like the fear of conflict or, abandonment of setting that boundary, people pleasing tendencies, not wanting to upset others, cultural or family expectations, thoughts like, setting this boundary is selfish, or, it's my job to be there for this person right now. I can't say no, right? Um, Rather than realizing that it's like, it's not my job to be here, but I need to make that space for myself as well. If someone is kind of needing extra time from you or extra mental energy.
And it's all those little T traumas and big T traumas from the past, right? For all that your
Yeah.
brain has been conditioned in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, and you only have, about 90 seconds to decide what to do.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you can automatically go into one of these, and then you're feeling hard on yourself about whatever boundary that you're putting on someone else or even on yourself, right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes you put
Yeah.
some self-imposed things that
Yeah.
nobody else
That's
put on
true.
you, and you're like, what just happened?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it
No.
gets really tricky. It gets tricky.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It really does. Um, how to set a boundary. So these are kind of the steps to kind of like really take and pause with when you're feeling like a boundary is maybe necessary in the moment, and how to like proceed more mindfully with that. So like noticing the discomfort you're feeling. Like, is it resentment? Is it anxiety? Are you feeling exhaustion? Just kind of recognizing what it is that is coming up for you that you feel that boundary is necessary. Um, then identifying the need, kind of going back, like, what type of boundary do I need to set? Is it, around time, or is it around physical space? Do I need rest? Do I need more respect from this person, right? Stating the boundary clear and calmly. I think maybe even like sometimes it's helpful to, before having the conversation around setting the boundary, maybe writing down like what you really want to say and what you want to, what the message is that you want to kind of relay to who you're setting the boundary with, so that you know exactly how you want to relay that message. And again, expect the discomfort that follows, both yours and theirs. It's discomfort happens with setting a boundary. There's pushback when a boundary is set. Um, People can be sad or disappointed or even like angry and frustrated. And that's both yourself and the person or people that you're setting a boundary with. Just kind of knowing that that might come up and being more aware of that can be helpful, just so it's not coming as a surprise, right? And then repeating it if needed, repeating the boundary. Some different like language examples, like, I'm not able to do that right now, or I need some time to think about that. That doesn't necessarily work for me right now. Or this is a great one, like, I can help with X, but not with Y. So still choosing to like help out, but also kind of saying like, I can't do everything, right? I think that's a really good one. So our first real world example, the case of Maya. So Maya is a full-time college student who works part-time, and her coworker frequently is asking her to cover extra shifts. So Maya is often feeling really exhausted and overwhelmed, but she is saying yes because she doesn't want to seem unreliable or difficult. So over time, as this is happening, Maya is beginning to feel really resentful towards that coworker and really frustrated by them. Also just burnt out because they're now working so much while also being a full-time student. Um, and anxious, whenever she's receiving any text from work, whether it's about her coming in or it's about something completely different, she just gets those immediate kind of physical anxiety symptoms like her heart is racing or shortness of breath anytime she's getting any communication from work. So what she's kind of telling herself now at this point before setting the boundary, it's like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. I'll just come in. It's just one shift. They'll be upset if I say no, or I should just be able to handle it, right? And that's Maya. She's sad. And then we have happy Maya. What signs?
She made it to the other side.
She made it. Easy as that. What signs are suggesting that Maya's boundaries are unclear? So I think some of the signs that the boundaries are unclear is the resentment she's feeling. She's feeling burnt out. She's experiencing, these emotional, mental impacts, the anxiety, right? Those are signs that she's not setting a clear boundary and something needs to change. What fears might be preventing her from setting the boundary? Like we talked about, she doesn't want to seem unreliable. She doesn't want to seem difficult. She's a student and this is also her, she's working part-time and doesn't want to, have a bad reputation in her work as being someone who, doesn't help out her coworkers by coming in. So that's, something that is preventing her from setting the boundary. And so what might a healthy boundary look like in this situation? And so I kind of gave like an example response here. So Maya can shift from an unclear response, such as, I guess I can try to make that work, or fine, I'll just come in, to kind of the responses we gave on the other side, to a more clear boundary, such as, I'm not able to cover extra shifts right now. I need to focus on my current workload or my current studies, right, because she is a student. Or just simply, I can't take additional hours this week. Sometimes you're not mandated to give like an explanation or, like an explanation of why you're setting that boundary. Sometimes it's as simple as, I just can't work additional hours this week, right? And that's just as simple as it is. So key things to remember here with the case for Maya, she is not responsible for solving the staffing issues at her job. That is not the job. She's not the manager. That is someone else that is taking that responsibility. Discomfort does not equal wrongdoing. So just because, she, like the coworker might be upset that Maya can't cover the shift, or maybe even the manager is upset that Maya's not covering the shift, that does not mean that setting the boundary was wrong. Boundaries protect energy and hopefully prevent resentment. She was feeling a lot of resentment towards her coworker for constantly asking her to come in. But hopefully setting this boundary will help protect her mental state and prevent feeling those negative feelings towards her coworker. And again, like I said, a boundary doesn't require over-explaining. Her boundary could just be, I just can't work extra shifts that week. And that's just the fact of it, right? Another real world example. So this is a romantic relationship example. So the case of Jordan and Alex, with a main focus on Jordan here. So Jordan has been dating Alex for about a year. Lately, Alex has been asking to spend nearly every evening together. And when Jordan asks for a night alone to recharge, Alex responds with comments such as, why don't you want to spend time with me? Or are you mad at me? Jordan then starts to feel guilty for wanting alone time, starts to feel anxious about bringing up personal needs, and then is also feeling responsible for managing Alex's emotions. This is leading Jordan to cancel personal plans and agree to spend more time with Alex, which is leaving them drained. And I imagine feeling more resentful of Alex too, feeling like they're taking away a lot of their, personal time to recharge, which is something it sounds like is really something Jordan needs in this moment. So what need is Jordan trying to express? It sounds like Jordan is really trying to express that they really value their personal space and their alone time, right? While also trying to express that they really care for Alex and they also really value their time with Alex as well. It's just they need to be able to balance that. What belief might be stopping Jordan from setting a boundary, feeling like they're responsible for Alex's emotions. That was mentioned on the last slide. Feeling like, oh, well, if I don't spend time with Alex, that's going to ruin their day and make them feel really upset. And so I need to be in charge of Alex's emotions and make sure I'm, doing this for them. That might be a belief that's stopping them from setting that boundary. And so what might a healthy boundary sound like here in this case? So the unclear response here might sound like, it's fine, like, let's just hang out. I don't, need to spend time alone tonight. Like, we can hang out. Or Jordan can try and be more clear and a little bit more assertive by saying something along the lines of, spending time together is really important to me, but I also need time alone to recharge. I'm going to take tonight for myself and we can plan something for tomorrow. This is not about me pulling away from you, right? Clearly stating that this is, a situation that is something that they need for themselves, emphasizing that they can plan something for the next day, and that this does not have to do with Alex or Jordan's feelings for Alex. It simply has to do with Jordan's needs of feeling like they need to just spend some time with themselves, right?
To connect this skill that Pearl is lovely sharing here. So this is a DBT skill that's Pearl's just slid in there real casually, right, Pearl? So this is in our interpersonal effectiveness section of DBT modules. So if you're interested in learning how to practice this or learn more about communicating boundaries and communicating things to others, there's a whole module on how to do this, which can be a few weeks of learning how to communicate your needs and then practicing the skills, getting comfortable with them, and really understanding just how Jordan is in this case, the intensity of saying yes or no to something, like really getting the like pros and cons of doing both, and then being clear and not minimizing your own experience. And sometimes you might, right? Sometimes Jordan might say yes, right? Right, girl, a different day. And sometimes they might say no and say, hey, like I need that alone time today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just having the ability to do that when they feel they need it, right? Absolutely. And so key things here with this case is that needing space does not mean lack of love. I think that's something that Jordan was really trying to communicate with Alex and also needed to remember for themselves, right? A partner's emotional reaction does not automatically mean that the boundary was wrong. Kind of similarly with Maya. It's like because there's, a negative reaction, that doesn't mean that setting the boundary wasn't the right thing to do in that case. Also, healthy relationships include interdependence, not enmeshment, and that boundaries can actually strengthen long-term connection. So over time, setting these boundaries between themselves in this relationship can actually make their relationship stronger and have better communication. And hopefully teach Alex too to set boundaries for them or themselves as well. Because I think there's definitely like attachment styles coming into play here too. And that's something that's always adaptable as well, which we talk about in another webinar. So check that one out as well.
Yeah, that was last year, bro.
Yeah, I know. Definitely links here for sure. So what happens when others push back? Like we talked about, discomfort's going to happen, and that's okay. That's what happens sometimes when we do set a boundary. Remember that pushback does not mean that setting the boundary was the wrong thing to do. People become accustomed to old patterns and often will resist change to that pattern. And sometimes it takes time for that pattern to get readjusted into a new pattern. Repeating the boundary, adjusting access to that person, and accept the discomfort without over explaining, kind of like what we talked with the case of Maya. Another key point to remember is that boundaries can often reveal those who respect you and respect your limits. I think that's a really important thing to remember. So if this is your first time setting boundaries and even hearing about what boundaries are, start with small steps. Start with low risk boundaries that might not lead to, big emotional conversations or, a lot of pushback. Start with something small that you might be an easy boundary to set for yourself. Practice boundary setting with safe people as well, with people that you trust, that respect your time and limits. Try setting one boundary this week, starting off small as well, and reflect on how it feels afterwards. So as we conclude, just a couple of main takeaways that boundaries are a skill and they are something that take practice. It's something that we learn and adapt. It's not something that you're like born with the ability to set a boundary. We can all set boundaries in our lives, and it's something that takes practice to protect our own peace. And you are allowed to prioritize your well-being, and that is okay. And there's just a nice little smiley face there for that. And just, oh, my references. But yeah, there we go.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed little takeaways about boundaries as we're wrapping up February, the month of love, right, Pearl?
Yes.
So consider the boundaries of different walks of your life, different types of roles that you're in, and how they impact you and how they might change over time or have changed. And that'll help you decide what you need some more practice with and to change for yourself.
Absolutely.
And it just takes practice. You have to keep going. So remembering what with practice allows you to fail a few times.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have those moments where it's not going to go well, and you're going to have all the intentions of saying yes or no to something. And then you get up in there, and all of a sudden you just don't do what you thought you were going to do, and you walk away. So be kind to yourself, lead with grace, and know that we're here if you want to practice some more and learn from us as well. Pearl is on the way out for the practice, so you won't be seeing her much anymore, at least for right now. And we'll be around with some other interns that you'll be able to see more information on future webinars coming up.
Awesome.
Any questions from our attendees that are here? Is there comments, anything before we wrap it up for the day? It'll only allow you to use the chat box. It won't allow you to unmute if you wanted to say anything or put anything in the Q&A. As we're just making sure if we have any questions or feedback, you can contact us at hello@allowhealth.net for intake information or inquiry about our practice. We're a virtual group practice. We do take some major insurances as well as have some options and connections through OpenPath and the Pro Bono Project here in Maryland. So we're involved in different avenues to take care of the community as well. Just let us know what you need. We'll figure it out.
Awesome.
All right. All right. Well, I think that's it, Pearl. Thank you all for either attending live or watching us on our channel. Check out our other videos. As Pearl's giving the plug, we have attachment video that if you watch this one might really connect with you.
Yes.
For just more information.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
All right, people. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Okay, you ended it.